A radio show host in Seattle called Paul Gallant.
You are definitely living in the hindsight world today, Paul.
Do you feel there's been a consistent theme with the interceptions?
I think every interception really has a different story.
I was just kind of curious what Paul gets to say.
You got grow up, mother. Are you kidding me?
Paul Gallant, what the hell is wrong with you?
Hello and welcome aboard another episode of the Gallant Says podcast, available live on Twitch and YouTube weekdays 1 Central Time. That's at least the time we're rolling with for 2 days in a row. You can also check this out wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. It is November 1st of 2022, a Tuesday. The first comment comes from Sicarius23. Oh no! What did Kyrie do this time? My question back. Does it even fucking matter anymore with Kyrie Irving? So, you might have seen, after a game that his Brooklyn Nets lost by 10 points, Kyrie Irving being confronted for promoting a couple of things on Twitter. One of them is a movie that's largely anti-Semitic in tone and full of inaccuracies and I think some Holocaust denials. The other was an Alex Jones conspiracy of some sort. He put it out on his Twitter and people got mad at him for it. But does it matter what he puts out? Because the guy's just so full of shit. And that's not to say he's even a bad person because of it. I think we all in life have people in our group of friends who are just completely confident in their opinions while at the same time being completely full of shit with said opinions that they've probably pilfered from somebody else. It gets even worse when these people carry themselves with an air of intellectualism. And we see this in the sports world a lot. Guys like Aaron Rodgers have been doing it a lot too. They speak, they believe what they're talking about, but they just come off as people who more want you to believe that they are deep thinkers, that they have a different outlook on things, than trying to give you something that makes you think differently in any way, shape, or form. So I really want to know why it is that people support some of the things that Kyrie Irving puts out there. And forget, if you can, the fact that he is tweeting out a link to a movie that is 3.5 hours long about fucking who even knows? All you need to know is that there's a lot of people that are mad that he watched it. When he puts that out, who is it that supports him for doing it? And why, if they do support him for doing it? It's one thing if you're a Nets fan or just a Kyrie Irving fan. But if you're not, is it the expression of free speech? Because the expression of free speech should also allow for you to come down on somebody who is carrying themselves like a fucking moron. And I think that's what Kyrie is doing regularly when he tries to act like he's this massive, deep thinker or philosopher. And if he actually were to engage with people when they challenge him on some of his opinions, like the idea that the earth is flat, which is just fucking stupid, I think I would actually give him a little more benefit of the doubt. But it seems like a lot of his colleagues give him that benefit of the doubt. And maybe that's just because basketball players feel like they are above the average member of society. You, me, people who cover the sport, fans. And there is some truth to that. How could we possibly understand what it's like to have everything that you do on a court under a microscope at your job, let alone what you do off the court in your own personal life? But it's because you're more interesting than the average person, not just because of what you do on the basketball court, but because people like to take a look at the lives of those who are living ones that they will never be able to live themselves. It's just natural. And yet, with Kyrie, there's a lot of solidarity for him coming from the NBA in particular. And that makes me just curious. I don't know how anyone would hear some of the things that Kyrie Irving says, or watching him burning sage before a game between the Celtics and the Nets when he's returning to town after having like stomped on the leprechaun logo at the Boston Garden, which wasn't that big of a deal. But the acts in totality, wouldn't you look at him a little different? Wouldn't you actually ask him the question like, hey, why are you the way that you are? Zacharias23 says on the YouTube, there's being full of shit and then being completely removed from reality. But Irving's not removed from reality. Irving is not doing acid, lying in his bed, staring up at the ceiling, or at a lodge or hut in Nepal doing some sort of, I don't know, herbal cleanse, ayahuasca. Like he is firmly entrenched in the real world. He goes off on these side quests, I guess in the pursuit of knowledge or something like that. Zacharias23 says, hey, we don't know that he hasn't done that. He probably has. But when he goes off, there's no one that even thinks to say, hey, come back to reality. I don't think anyone's actually confident enough to call him on it, because you would think that there would be some players out there that instead of putting out statements about why they can no longer be associated with Kanye West's sneakers, that they would actually confront these people that are in their field and say like, dude, what are you fucking doing? I know that we have seen that before with Julian Edelman in a back and forth that he had with Eagles wide receiver Deshaun Jackson, who was pushing some of the same bullshit, anti-Semitic rhetoric that I think Kyrie Irving's been pushing. Julian Edelman talked to him and said, hey, let's talk about it. And he might have done that because he is Jewish. But where's anybody else to do it? And I'm not saying even to do it because you're taking a stand for the Jewish people or something like that. I'm saying to do it just because, what is he fucking doing? Are you not kind of curious? Do you feel like he is acting in his own best interests? Do you feel like he is hurting himself? Do you feel like he is hurting, by proxy, the league? Maybe you? It's surprising. It just seems like whenever Kyrie Irving says something, people kind of sit back, they watch it, and then they just go about their day. And there are certain things that once you open the can of worms, there's not really any coming back from. And I think that's where Kyrie Irving is right now. And to go back to the first question I asked, who out there takes anything that guy says seriously, and why? Just give me a reason. I really want to know. Or anybody that's like Kyrie Irving pushing out, at best, conspiracy theories that aren't founded in a lot of fact, that have a lot of just errors along the way. Zacharias23 says, I think it's part of one of those bless his heart kind of things. And he just isn't listening to any pushback. Clearly, he's not listening to any pushback based off of the press conference that he did after that 10-point loss to the Pacers, where he essentially put his fingers in his ears and said, la, 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 like a child. And that's his right. Like, he doesn't have to necessarily engage those questions, because sometimes at press conferences, the questions that are asked of somebody tend to feel performative. I'm asking this question so it looks like I'm tough as a media reporter. I am holding this person accountable for some, I guess, supposed slight through verbal form or something like that, which I guess is what Kyrie's kind of doing by endorsing or promoting this movie. But it's very strange to me that there is anybody out there who would listen to what Kyrie said and not even ask a question? Is it because he's famous? Is it because he's rich? Is it because he's a basketball player? Is it because there's so much distrust of media today that someone like Kyrie Irving speaking up about something like, I don't know, vaccines and being right about maybe some of those vaccine takes that he's had, not all of them, but having just questions about, hey, why is it that he's not allowed to play on a basketball court in New York of all places, but anywhere else it was okay? I think there were some fair questions that he's asked. It's not like he's always been completely full of shit with every single thing that he said. No one really is that way. Everyone, I think, when they speak, there's at least one point where they're going to say something truthful. Alex Jones is a fucking crazy person, but I mean, he's had some moments where he said things that actually are interesting and maybe things that need to be unpacked a little bit further. The problem is when you say something like Sandy Hook didn't happen, you're going to get absolutely destroyed. And rightfully so when you're saying it's some sort of false flag or some bullshit like that. But anyway, I just want to know who supports Kyrie Irving and why. Especially after a day like today, where we found out that Steve Nash, the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets, is gone. The decision to part ways was mutual between the Nets and Nash, per Adrian Wojnarowski. Sean Marks, general manager of the Nets: we want to thank Steve for everything he brought to our franchise over the past 2+ seasons. Since becoming head coach, Steve was faced with a number of unprecedented challenges. Yeah, I'll fucking say. And we are sincerely grateful for his leadership, patience, and humility throughout his tenure. Personally, this was an immensely difficult decision. However, after much deliberation and evaluation of how the season has begun, we agreed that a change is necessary at this time. Nash, in a separate statement, thanked Marks and team ownership for, quote, an amazing experience with many challenges that I'm incredibly grateful for. What challenge would you be grateful for along the way? You've had Kyrie Irving not being able to play because he's unvaccinated and making a big deal about being unvaccinated along the way, which leads to questions asked of Steve Nash and of his teammates. You have Ben Simmons, who apparently is too good to try to improve at basketball. What along the way would you have been grateful for of all of those challenges that you faced? Kevin Durant wanted you fired. Kevin Durant probably wanted to be elsewhere. What of those challenges would you want? Jacques Vaughn, the assistant head coach, is going to be acting head coach tonight. And now you're seeing rumors that the Nets could speak with Boston Celtics head coach Ime Udoka, who is suspended for this season, and former Utah coach Quinn Snyder. I guess Boston would let Udoka leave for another job. Interesting that that's the route that they would choose to go. Udoka did do a pretty good job with the Boston Celtics last year, though I suppose that we don't quite know everything that went down in Boston when it comes to whatever improper relationships he might have been having. But what if you are Steve Nash, like, would you have been thankful for along the way? It seems like it was just a completely shitty experience. And on top of that, imagine Kyrie Irving's talking out his ass about a bunch of stuff. Kevin Durant's just constantly miserable. And Ben Simmons doesn't want to play basketball. Sounds absolutely terrible. And look, Kyrie Irving, he's partly at fault for this. Anyway, I'm getting kind of frustrated baseball-wise with this playoffs for the Houston Astros. It's hard to get a feeling of momentum or to maintain proper excitement over the course of a playoffs where the Astros had won every single game until game 1 of the World Series. The amount of time off that we have seen has fucking sucked. The divisional series. So some people argued that this gave the Seattle Mariners maybe an advantage, that after Seattle won the first 2 of their 3-game series against Toronto on Saturday, that there was a Sunday and a Monday off before the Astros actually played them in game 1, that there was a day off between game 1 and game 2. So 1 day off after that, another day off between game 2 and game 3, and the series moving to Seattle. Then you had the 16th, 17th, and 18th off before the league championship series began. You had a travel day after game 2 of the World Series at Minute Maid Park, and the series shifted to New York. And then you had off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday before game 1 of the World Series. A day in between, at least originally scheduled, game 2 and game 3. A rain delay. So if we're adding up all the days that the Astros have had off since the beginning of the postseason, not even counting the wild card series, we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If my math is correct. 10 days off to open up the postseason. It's a little frustrating. I'd like to see this every single night. And I know there's a lot of bitching and moaning going on Astros Twitter about how the Phillies are going to get a unfair advantage by this series getting delayed due to a rain delay, that they get to reset their rotation, they get to push things back. I don't even care about that side of things. If the Astros lose this series because of weather delays, they didn't deserve to win the thing to begin with. And I don't think that the whining about advantages that the Phillies are getting from this is quite becoming of an Astros fan. I think it's kind of embarrassing. Really. Like, hey, if you're good, you should win. Oh, the Phillies get a couple of days off. Like, you're better than the Phillies. The Phillies aren't very good. They lost 13-20 to end the season. So, just a thought. Some comments. Largo bot. Paulie, my man, didn't even realize you had your own Twitch channel. Nice. I do. I don't post nearly enough to it, but this is where we try to at least once a week do the podcast. We've been doing this for a couple of months on and off. I have a hard time just keeping myself to a routine. I feel like I need like a concierge or an assistant or something like that to do all my shit. Felipe Ramirez says, will Verlander stink it up again if he starts game 5? Well, he's going to start game 5, at least the way things are currently scheduled. And I don't know. I mean, he has been bad in this postseason. We didn't even talk about today how on the way to the Phillies stadium yesterday, I guess people in Philadelphia were throwing rocks at the bus, and they actually might have shattered one of the windows, and Verlander got off the bus, and he was giving them both the bird on his way down. That was a funny moment, but it doesn't make me feel like a whole lot better that Justin Verlander is going to be able to be on his A game in the postseason against Philly, because he never really has been in the World Series. He's always sucked in the World Series. It's pretty frustrating. Why it is that he's 0-6 and 9 career starts with a 6+ ERA, I honestly couldn't tell you. All I know is that it sucks. Sicarius23 says, typical Philly fan behavior. Yeah, it is funny that we kind of shrug at what Philadelphia does. I think if this happened in other cities, there would be a little bit more of a big deal made about it. But it's Philadelphia. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, well, that's just them. Classic Phillies fans. The NFL trade deadline is this afternoon. Right now, we are recording this. It's 1:18 Central Time. The deadline itself is going to be at 3. As far as actual deals that have taken place, you saw Robert Quinn, the Philadelphia Eagles, making that trade last week. Late last night, you saw Roquan Smith, Bears linebacker. He goes from the Bears to the Ravens. Pittsburgh has traded Chase Claypool to the Chicago Bears. I think that has to do with some of the messy stuff going on where Kenny Pickett's calling out players for not knowing the playbook. Chase Claypool thinks he's like a top 5 wide receiver. Pretty crazy. And the other trade that took place is the Detroit Lions traded TJ Hawkinson to the Vikings. The NFL trade deadline is too early. I don't get why it takes place at this point during the season. I think if it took place a little bit later, you would actually see more big moves made. Baseball's trade deadline is what? 3/4 of the way through the season at the end of July? You also have, when is basketball's trade deadline? Sometime around February, right? Like right before the All-Star break. So again, like 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way through the season. And the NFL's trade deadline, it takes place 8 games in, not even halfway through a 17-game slate or an 18-game regular season. Why not push it back a couple of weeks? Because it's largely boring. And you would think that there would be teams that actually have some balls that make big-time moves. Like TJ Hawkinson getting moved for a 2nd-round pick and a 3rd-round pick. Like, I don't know. Kind of disappointing. I want to get a little bit more out of it. We are seeing that Brandon Cooks, who clearly hates it here in Houston after, for whatever reason, thinking that it would be in his best interest to stick around with the Texans from last year going into this year. He is, I guess, going to be shopped. I don't know if there's a deal that has been put in place, and you'll, of course, find out about it between now and tomorrow if you're listening to this on the actual podcast itself. I don't know what you would actually get in return for him. I don't think you would get that much. The guy just doesn't seem to be engaged at all, which is weird considering what he had said this offseason. I got to say, I hate that he gave himself the nickname The Archer. Kind of lame. Oh, Largobot's giving me a link right here. So I did see this news today, and I mean, here's what's sad about me from a musical perspective. It's a bummer, but in the Migos rapper group, there was a shooting today in Houston. I guess it was downtown Houston, and Takeoff from Migos, he got shot. I don't know exactly what happened. Largobot put that out. That's the supposed explanation for Takeoff getting shot. He continues by saying, Largobot in the Twitch chat, the Kennedy assassination seems more straightforward than this. I'm not one to really speak on this, mainly because I thought that Migos was one rapper until today. So it goes to show you how musically challenged I am. I saw the video that this happened downtown. I think pretty close to the House of Blues and close to where AT&T Sportsnet Southwest is based. That's pretty surprising. I didn't think that's an area of town where shit gets down. I didn't. But he was fatally shot this morning. Here's the tweet. And again, I don't know if this is actually factual, but it comes from a text. Quavo was shooting dice, and he was getting his pockets broke off bad. So he had an attitude, and he tried getting aggressive with the wrong mob-tied bleeps. Not going to drop names. And dude got on his ass. Somebody they was with jumped up, and that's when everyone bunched up. Shots started ringing. They were coming from somebody Migos was with, but he was shooting wild and hit Takeoff on accident. The other guys started shooting back. I think he got hit again, but ultimately his own guys killed him because when he got hit the first time, I saw his body just drop. Quavo was plexed up over some small stuff. It really wasn't worth it. Per this text, which I have no idea if it's actually true, Takeoff was the coolest, quietest guy in the room the whole time. He wasn't saying a word, just chilling. He didn't even know what was going on. He just jumped up and got shot out of nowhere. Houston for show about to be a no-fly zone because the mob was supposed to be protecting these artists. Huh. Interesting. Look, if that's actually what happened, it's an absolute shame. It is really sad that the guy died. I am surprised that people put themselves in situations from a gambling perspective where things could theoretically escalate to that point. I guess this happens in dice. I would assume that this could happen in certain poker places as well. That it gets so heated that someone would potentially get killed out of it. It's like one of many reasons that I just don't find the appeal in gambling. You're putting a lot of money down, you lose, you're going to get pissed off. Say somebody's talking a little shit to you, you get mad at them. Theoretically, someone could cheat you. I don't know if there's like loaded dice. I remember there was an incident that took place with Seahawks corner Quinton Dunbar and former first-round pick DeAndre Baker. When I was in Seattle, Dunbar was allegedly at a dice game where there was a robbery that went down, and DeAndre Baker was there too. I guess both of them did in their own way get exonerated, but I don't know. It just seems like dice games, shit happens a lot at them. Maybe if gambling was legal, this wouldn't, but I'm trying to think, is there even Is there even a place, like, say, at a casino or something like that where dice is actually legal? Is dice legal? We're doing shit on the fly here. Is dice illegal? Is rolling dice for money illegal? This is at bestuscasinos.com. Betting on dice is probably as old as the dice themselves. Blah, 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 blah. Is street craps illegal? Before we get into the details, I want to start out by saying that I'm not a lawyer and I absolutely don't intend anyone to take this post as legal advice. If you're genuinely concerned about the legality of something you're doing, please talk to a real lawyer. When researching the legality of rolling dice for money, you come across this sentiment pretty frequently. Rolling dice for money is unregulated gambling, and that makes it illegal. But that's not entirely true. Many U.S. states allow what's called social gambling or private gambling. Social or private gambling is a legal way to talk about things like card games in private homes, Super Bowl squares, bets, or raffles, and bingo games played in social settings to raise money for charity. Okay. Carve-outs in state gambling law for social gambling are common. Some 27 U.S. states allow a form of unregulated gambling under the right conditions. These U.S. gambling laws are a recognition of the social history of games of chance in America. The fact that most of us have participated in some form of private or social game of chance or skill in our lifetimes. Most of the time, the law specifies what makes a game private. In Texas, state law spells out what must occur for gambling to be considered social. The gambling must be done in a private place, meaning one that's inaccessible to the public. The only person to receive any benefit must be the winner of each individual bet, and the chances of winning and losing must be equal between all participants. Okay, so based off of what I'm reading, and again, I don't have many details on what happened right there, but with Takeoff, who was shot and killed in Houston, I guess early this morning, late last night. But it doesn't seem like that was a private place. Seems like it took place outside at that Lucky Strike next to House of Blues. Was it inside the Lucky Strike? Was it outside the Lucky Strike? I don't even know what the hell Lucky Strike is, to be perfectly honest. We are really operating with this story blind. I saw it this morning right before the show started, and I was like, I don't know anything about this. Lucky Strike is a bowling alley. That's what I thought. I'm assuming that unless there was a private room, that this was not legal. Not that it matters. My white ass is just one person that would not put himself in a situation like that. Sicarius 23 says it's 810 billiards and bowling. I think it's just surprising that it happened downtown. I didn't think that this is something that would happen downtown. There are some parts of town that are a little shady. Some are closer to me that I could see something like this going down. And I would say in particular, close to some of these strip clubs that are on the part of town I'm in. I'm like slightly west of the Galleria here in Houston. And there are some areas where I just feel like walking around, looking around, like it would be a slow response time for cops. And that something could happen pretty quickly if you aren't watching your back, looking around, etc. Not that I wouldn't go to those places at all. I just would be a lot more wary and probably wouldn't be wearing any jewelry or watches or anything like that if I were walking through it. But again, gambling, I feel like this is the shit that happens in any sort of gambling situation. Like either you're going to get mad, lose money, you're going to bet more money than you actually can afford and end up getting your legs broken by like some mobsters, or something like this could theoretically go down. Oof. Some comments here we got from the ESPN 97.5 Twitch. I appreciate the ESPN 97.5 Twitchers coming over to this show, because this is one of those shows where I'm like, I don't really know what to talk about because of all the fucking days off that we've had in between these games of the World Series. I mean, man, I'm not mad about it from a Phillies advantage. I'm just like, can we please play some fucking games? There's too many days off. Like, I just feel like it's this long-ass holding pattern. I want to see the Astros eventually crowned, but, like, Jesus. Too many days off. Anyway, appreciate you tuning in to this very loosely organized edition of the Gallant Says podcast, which you can check out wherever you get your podcast, but also watch live, either on Twitch or on YouTube, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says. Big thanks to everybody who jumps aboard. We'll be back at it again tomorrow at 1. I think 1 o'clock's the best time to do it. Still got some momentum. Still got some excitement from the radio show. King of all Twitch just says, okay, Paulie, fuck off and see you tomorrow. Yeah, that sounds good. We go like 30 minutes on this one. We're not monetized yet. If we ever get to that point, maybe this thing will go a little bit longer. Anyway, appreciate y'all for tuning in. We'll go back to getting yelled at by the angry Wisconsin man right now. So long. Farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful Tuesday. We will be back